Thanks for joining us for this episode of Coffee with Closers, where business leaders share insights on how to build businesses from the ground up and best practices for innovating in their industry.
Hey, Patrick, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here, man. Excited to chat through and hopefully get into a good discussion here.
Most certainly. And obviously, you're an entrepreneur, any other entrepreneur, everyone goes through some sort of a personal story of how they became an entrepreneur. And I was looking through your LinkedIn and saw some of your experiences, but I'm just curious to learn, how did you become an entrepreneur? How did this idea for ProfitWell came about?
Yeah, I'll try to give you the shortest version possible. I definitely didn't. I had no will to become an entrepreneur, become a business person. Actually, I grew up in a union household in Wisconsin, and so any idea of management or business was you were bad. You were not a good person. Well, not a good person, but it was all about the worker kind of thing. And so my parents were always like, "Oh, go be a doctor. Go be a lawyer." Kind of that natural progression. And so I did have some entrepreneurial type of tendencies when I was a kid. But it was one of those things where I was going to go first be a doctor. Then I was, kind of nervous with blood. And then I was going to be a lawyer. And then it was like, there's too many lawyers. And then I was going to go save the world and, work for the government, which is what I ended up doing. I actually worked in the intelligence community. I worked for the NSA for a little while, which sounds so much cooler than it actually is. I always joke that I had Jack Ryan's desk job, so none of the fun stuff that you see in those shows, but all the boring stuff, which is where a lot of the work gets done. And then I was kind of fed up with the bureaucracy of government. As you can imagine, the government is pretty bureaucratic by design. And some of that's a good thing, but some of that's really frustrating when you're a young punk kid trying to, take over the world. And so ended up going and thought, I'll go work for this like tech company and it won't be bureaucratic. And that was Google. And, 30,000 people when I was there, it's like, of course it's going to be bureaucratic, right? And so jumped out, was in the startup scene a little bit. I worked for a company called Gemvara, which is a D2C company, kind of like Blue Nile, like customizable jewelry, and started doing pricing there. And basically, you're seeing a theme, was not really happy with the culture and convinced myself that I basically, if I was going to start something, I should do it when I don't have kids, don't have any obligations, don't have anything like that, and jumped into starting ProfitWell. And what ProfitWell became, it didn't necessarily start as this, is we do revenue operations products for subscription businesses. So we are able to, we have a free tool for, that 20,000, different subscription companies use. And then we make money through a couple of products that help with pricing and retention. But the long story short, my parents still think I should go be a doctor. Like to this day, they want me to go to med school, even though I'm kind of old to go to med school now. And they were freaking out that I went from like such a secure government job to a great job at Google to a startup that was venture backed to basically starting something from nothing. And so I think it's worked out so far, but yeah, we'll see. That's the long, really rambly, quick version, I guess, depending on how you look at it, of how I got here.
Yeah, and you're not the only one who actually shared the story of where the family was opposed to the whole idea of their children going into an entrepreneurial journey. But I see this to be a common theme, and I'm seeing more and more so with the younger entrepreneurs, where they didn't really have an example of where their parents were actually in business. And I guess most baby boomers all like their secure jobs, and they just kind of want that for their children as well. It seems as though. So what's your personal motivation? What's the why that keeps you going?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And it's a hard one to answer. And I think for me, I think the reason this is so hard is that people don't ask you that when you're growing up, unless they're like really in tune mentors or parents or stuff like that. Mm-hmm. It's always about, you have to go to college, or, then you have to get a good job, or, yeah, of course you have to have kids and stuff like that. And I think that we would benefit a lot if we kind of questioned our youth in society about figuring out their why. Because for me, I found myself chasing different things and then reacting and not understanding why I was reacting. And the reason is because I was trying to go after my why. And what my why has kind of come down to is I am fascinated by seeking truth. And what I mean by that is I'm competitive, but I also am really, really entranced by puzzles, and building a company is just a big puzzle. And I think that for me, that like why of like truth and also dedicating my life to figuring out some sort of truth is really important. And that's controversial a little bit, because I think that for me, this company is a major part of my life. It's not about making money. It's not about these things. I have given up a lot of things, and I will give up a lot of things in my life, for building this company. But I found myself finally not being apologetic for that, and surrounding myself with people who are okay with me, trying to be LeBron of a business, right? We don't ask LeBron like, hey, do you have enough work-life balance? Are you taking enough time spending it with your kids, right? Like, I think it's one of those things where if I expected that out of my team, it'd be a little bit different, but I don't. I expect that out of myself, though. And I think that journey of seeking truth and figuring out this big puzzle is what really drives me.
That's awesome to hear. Is there any big lessons you learned by becoming an entrepreneur?
I think entrepreneurship, especially if you're starting it and you've never done this before, the first time, it kicks you in the face in really good ways, right? Because at the end of the day, your success or failure is so much tied to yourself, especially in the early days. Now, as you grow, all of a sudden success is really about the team and failure is all about you, which is an interesting dynamic. But I think that in the early days, it's one of those things where you can't hide. Like, you can't hide from, oh, well, maybe it's because my boss doesn't like me or these types of things. It's like, no, you're the boss. And not only that, but getting this thing off the ground, figuring out where the product is, figuring out where the growth is going to come from in the early days, like, that's on you. And there's a lot of no's to get to yeses, whether you're raising money or not raising money. And I think it taught me this resilience of, kind of harnessing how I react to things. So you don't know me that well, but I'm actually a rather insecure person. And I used to think that was a liability and I just needed to fix that. And what entrepreneurship kind of taught me, and I think, for you, it might be something different, but for me, it was, no, that's okay. Accept that and use it rather than trying to like get rid of that. And that's what helps you kind of move along, and that's what helps you get better. So yeah, it's made me a much more confident person, but it's also made me someone who is, much more in tune with, it's not about right or wrong. It's not about one extreme or another extreme. It's about like finding, what the truth is, and then, acting in accordance with that truth.
Yeah. And I think for me, it was being an introvert. I was super introvert. And I think just being an entrepreneur and actually having to be in sales kind of made me an extrovert. And also my biggest weakness, I believe, is perfectionism, because I think I start a lot of things, but because I'm not super happy with how the product came about, I just never finish it because I'm like, well, it's not perfect. So let me spend a little bit more time. And I looking for that perfect time to finish that perfect job, and it just never gets done. So that's my biggest enemy. So obviously you touched on an important factor earlier. You were talking about like, as you're an entrepreneur, the failure and success kind of relies on you. So personal development also is a big part of being an entrepreneur, right? Just really investing in yourself, trying to find the networks, trying to find connections, especially peer groups, things of that nature. What are some of the things that you're doing that's working really well from a personal development standpoint?
Yeah, I think, so I'm not a part of like a mastermind group or anything like that. I don't have a coach. And part of me questions that quite often, maybe I should, someone external, but I think that for me, I lucked into a very good, like, I don't know if you want to call it a friend group. I mean, they are my friends, but I lucked into a very like good group of other founders, other executives who we are kind of our own little advisory group. So that's like the guys from Wistia, the folks from Litmus, the folks from Help Scout, WildBit. That the group of founders, we would get together before COVID every so often, and basically, learn from each other, gripe with one another, these types of things. And I think the other thing that was really helpful is one of my business partners, his name's Facundo. He's our CPO. And Facundo is probably one of the most disagreeable people that I've ever met in my life. And my other business partner, Peter Zotto, who runs our revenue teams, he is probably one of the most agreeable people in I've ever met in my life. And so what's been fascinating is I think the best coaches I've had have been these business partners. Like, Facundo and I, just the number of some of them were arguments, but most of them thankfully were discussions. The number of those that we had to discuss and not be relenting about, getting ourselves better and being better for our team. I don't think I would have gotten that from an external coach, but I do think that there's external coaches that I would have gotten things from, and I will get things from. I think I'll have a coach at some point, but yeah, I think that's really where personal development comes. And I think the other thing is just, I talk to customers, I talk to users constantly, and there's nothing more terrifying but also brilliant about just getting told this sucks, that sucks, or we love it overall, but I don't like this. And like just getting used to that, that not that pain, but that ability to take criticism has been really, really good for me.
Yeah, and I think that's for firsthand information from your customers on how the product is serving them, where they want to see the product evolved or improved. Those are a great thing. And I'm one of those early adopters in Wistia. We've been a Wistia customer since the day one. I'm sure they evolved like 5 times and changed their pricing strategy completely. We're on one of those grandfather pricing structure on Wistia. Are there any bad advice that comes to mind when you started your journey as an entrepreneur that people gave you? I'm sure you've had those from your parents that told you don't do it. But other than that, are there anything that you would say, man, that was a stupid advice, I'm glad I didn't take it?
Oh yeah, there's a couple things. I mean, bad advice is hard, right? Because I think advice, like our job as just humans and people trying to be better, is to filter things. So take everything seriously, maybe not personally, but at least seriously, and then filter it, think about it, and then decide on how you're going to act. I think one piece of advice I got that probably is good for some people, but was really bad for me was, don't take meetings, don't go to events. Basically, take those pieces or take that time and dedicate it to product or something else. And part of me thinks that, yeah, that's good advice, and we could have been fine if I didn't take as many meetings or I didn't go to as many events. But a lot of our growth has come from, and we can kind of track this at least qualitatively and somewhat quantitatively, a lot of our growth has come from people we met, people that we helped or I talked to, and people I just like networked with. And then, they either referred us customers later, they became customers themselves. I think the differentiator is oftentimes, I was doing all of that time, but then also putting in the 8 hours of work at the office. And so, if you're only doing 8 hours and you're doing a bunch of events and stuff like that, it's probably not a good thing. But that was some bad advice, or not bad, but that was some advice that thankfully I didn't listen to in terms of pushing things out. And I think it's just, when you're early on, especially a first time founder, which I was, it's like, it's so hard to know what in the world is going on. So you want to speed up that learning cycle as much as possible. And the only way to do that is to get data or get information. And the only way you do that is either reading a lot, learning a lot, and then talking, to people, and then filtering that experience and, learning yourself basically as well. So yeah, that's a good piece.
Mm-hmm. Was there ever a time in your career where you were resistant to change as technology was evolving?
Yeah, I think right now I'm not a fan of remote. I think that remote, I think it's not that everyone goes remote eventually, right? Even if you have everyone in the same building, if you're a 10,000 person company, you're kind of remote at that point. Yes, you can technically get everyone in the same room, and the sub teams can get everyone in the same room, but there's a lot of elements that are kind of remote. I think that for me, I think that if you're working on a very difficult problem, and even if it doesn't seem like a difficult problem, just getting it off the ground is a difficult problem. I think it's very, very difficult to build great product or to build a great company being remote. Now, people have done it. Don't get me wrong. I think it's possible. I don't know if it's for me, if that makes sense. And for some people, I think it's better. I think for some people, it forces their understanding and forces their thinking. During 2020, we've certainly gotten a lot of benefit from remote because I think it forced us to kind of codify things that were not codified. But I think that there's probably a hybrid that normally they would say is not a good thing, but I think we're going to end up with a hybrid, kind of culture here at ProfitWell, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that to be the trend with a lot of companies, even the ones with massive office spaces are all giving kind of the optional work from home as a standard, not even just like a requirement, right? So it's kind of crazy that, maybe before COVID that wouldn't have be the case. And now, people are much more open. And I'm like you, because I kind of need the people around me. I just want to be able to get up and go talk to somebody. I just like that interaction more than I feel like chats have become much more inefficient if you ask me, because there's like 15 chats going on and it takes you away from actually doing your job, because you're like responding to this thread and that thread and all these threads, and you're just trying to catch up on chats for a good part of your day. So I don't find it super enjoyable for me in terms of chats. So I'm with you on that one. So obviously, as entrepreneurs, especially as you're getting started, right? As founder, you have this responsibility as a leader, big vision, big dream, casting that vision and kind of going toward it, right? And pursuing that. And in the same time, you're also building a team and managing all of that. So you have this dichotomy of kind of playing both a leader and a manager role. Which one do you normally kind of fall into as a default, or do you prefer one over the other?
Interesting perspective on leadership. I think we actually struggle with this at Profit. I mean, we're 70 people, just to give context. And so right now we're doing the whole idealistic thing where we don't like the word manager. Everyone should be a leader, like these types of things. And I think that, there's the old adage that, you will have some managers, but then everyone can be a leader. I think for us, our philosophy of leadership is very much decentralized and trying to figure out where there should be hierarchy and where there should just be like frontline decision making. Mm-hmm. And that's a really, really hard thing, because for us, it's more of, I want that specialist or that BDR on the front line to know how to write an email and know how to communicate. I don't want to make that head of BD the one writing the cadences, right? There's some advantages to doing the opposite, meaning the head of BD writing the cadences and then the BDR just kind of executing. But I think that in the long run, in terms of leverage and in terms of ROI, we're better off like making sure that person knows what's going on, and knows that they can kind of fend for themselves, if that makes sense. And so we do run a decentralized ship, and sometimes that's really frustrating for people. We tend to know, and we've gotten fairly good at recognizing when a decision needs to be made very quickly. And that kind of only works when you have a very servant leadership culture as well. And so that really means, Robert Greenleaf out of Illinois defined this term servant leadership. And the basic idea is it's an inverted pyramid where essentially you as a manager, as a leader, serve your team. And what that means is like, if something's in trouble, like you drop everything. Your team doesn't like do the logistical work. You do the logistical work. You convince your team to do something. You don't tell them to do something. And you would think that would be difficult, but I think the other thing that really helps us is we have a very like feedback driven culture, and a very open culture. And so there's a lot of debate, not volatile debate, but there's just a lot of debate of like, well, why are we doing it this way? Why are we doing it that way? And when these things all mix together, I think you get to a really, really good culture.
Yeah, and I think what you just touched on, I believe as a leader, we're more of the why people, like why are we doing this and why we exist, right? And then I think the manager needs to be more focused on the how and making sure that they know how to do the job. That can actually get us toward the why that we're trying to accomplish. That's just kind of my way of looking at it, because I think, I'm like you. I want people who are proactive, who can get the job done, who you don't need to super micromanage those people. And, as an SDR or AE, or they should be able to do their job. You shouldn't have to write every template and empower them, right? Empower them to be able to do it. You shouldn't have to write every template, because that's just not, a good culture anyway. So how has your perspective on sales and marketing changed now that you're an actual entrepreneur, you're a founder, and building a team? How has that perspective changed from where you were working for massive companies before?
Yeah. So just specifically sales and marketing, or other pieces too, or just,
primarily sales and marketing. Yeah.
I think with sales and marketing, I think sales and marketing is much more about product, not about your physical product, but like the product mindset, than I think anyone would ever have suggested. What's kind of funny is when I was at Google, I was in the sales operations group of the AdWords. So like selling AdWords, which is like a bulk of where they make their money. And it was kind of funny because like my conception of growth and marketing was just like Google ads, right? Like I'd never taken a marketing course. I'd never read any marketing books or that type of thing. And so what's kind of interesting is when starting ProfitWell, my mind went to a place of, oh, this is interesting. Like it's actually more like a product mindset of what are the channels that we're going to acquire through? Where are we going to get the most leverage in those channels? How are we going to develop them? And I think that what we've seen in the past like decade or so, and that's kind of where I've been involved in the past 7 years, is growth and distribution is actually getting much harder than building product. First 20 years of the millennium here, product was absolutely the hardest part because of the technological barriers, and now like distribution is harder than ever, and so you have to give a product mindset to it. It's no longer, oh, this new ad thing opened up, let's just buy that, or oh, let's now have this strategy because we had all these brand new marketing channels opening up. Now we're living in a world where everyone's using the same channels, and we have 10x more competitors, either direct or indirect, than we did, and that's a scary world to live in if you're kind of doing the, oh, I read a blog post and let me implement that kind of marketing that used to exist.
Yeah, that's a good point. And obviously, your entire business is all around pricing strategy. You're analyzing, you said 20,000 plus users that are using your ProfitWell product to just analyze, how their pricing works. And you also have some add-on products. And talk to me a little bit about what you've learned in the process of obviously, getting some insights on how these companies are operating. What have you seen in terms of working really well from a pricing strategy for SaaS companies?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just taking it seriously. And I know that's super basic. Like, here's an example. The average amount of time a company spends on their pricing each year is less than 15 hours. Not 15 hours a month, not 15 hours a week, 15 hours total throughout that year. And, if you think about like how much time and effort you spend on, your office space or your remote culture or whatever it is, you're spending a lot more time on it, right? And so I think that what a lot of people don't realize, and this is because of the early 2000s, is that you have three really big growth levers in your business. You have acquisition, monetization, and retention. You're going to spend half your budget, half your time on acquisition. That's just what you have to do because it's actually hard. It's really hard now. It's not something that you can just rack and stack reps and just have an amazing time. But the bulk of your growth, like meaning over just surviving, is going to come from good retention and proper pricing. And so I think that it has a 4 to 8x impact as the similar improvements in acquisition, just to give some context. You're not going to spend as much time or money, obviously, as acquisition, but you should probably spend more time or more money than you do now. So beyond kind of taking it seriously, to give a little bit more tactical pieces here, add-on strategies in both B2B and D2C, they're one of the most underutilized monetizable pieces out there. And then in addition to that, things like making sure you have a value metric, so you're charging on some sort of metric that grows with the customer, that bakes growth directly into how you price. And with that allows you to, kind of get mostly everything else wrong with your pricing. But if you get that right, you'll actually, do really, really well. So I would say those are the big pieces and the big trends, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Mostly you play in the SaaS space, and that's where your product is designed to help. But you're also seeing this trend, right? There's a lot of service companies that are now productizing their offering. And there's also this whole trend that I'm hearing, which is like, with I think it's service software with the service. I don't know if you've heard that. Software with the service, right? Which is kind of a new model that I'm hearing a lot of companies who have a product, but they're also adding on a service to deliver that to the end customer. So in those scenarios, I think my concern, and at least my understanding of it, right? When you have too many options and too many variables, it complicates the sales process, right? So what are some of the best practices that you can adopt, especially if it's not a straightforward, 3-price product, like, good, better, best. Especially when you have an add-on, what can you do to make sure that the sales process isn't complicated, or you can make sure that there's no real objections that comes up about the pricing?
There's this mindset with pricing that it's a single move game. And I think that's a huge problem. And in reality, it's a multi-move game. So let's imagine some of the hardest pricing, like a mobile app, right? And we're going to do a subscription to our mobile app. Well, if I'm using this mobile app and all of a sudden I'm on the free plan and now I want to upgrade, there's only so many pixels on that screen, right? The problem is that we think, oh, well, we can only have one plan and that's it. That's all we can do, right? It has to be $10 a month and that's it. Well, in reality, you can have people come in on that one plan for $10 a month, And then based off learning from them and understanding them as what type of user they are, then you kind of bifurcate and you basically are like, okay, cool. Now you should have these 3 plans, or you should have these 2 plans, or whatever it ends up being. And you might end up having 15 to 20 different plans or add-ons, but a user only sees 3 of them over the lifetime of their account, right? And I think that's what helps the sales process, is where you don't think about it as, one move. You think about it as, all right, we're going to convert them on this annual contract. Then we're typically going to try to sell them based on their usage, one of these 3 add-ons. Then when it comes for a renewal, we're going to upgrade them to this. And it just kind of keeps it simple by thinking about that relationship. I think the other really important thing for pricing and simplicity is making sure that you understand who you're selling to. There's nothing worse than going through a sales process where they don't understand who they're selling to. And so you see pricing or you see positioning that just has nothing to do with you. And then you kind of have to make a decision based on trust, which is not really a good thing as a good salesperson or as a vendor or someone trying to choose a vendor, right? And so I think that that's a really, really big thing to kind of focus on, is how do you make sure that it's like, hey, listen, what type of buyer are you? You're obviously probably not going to ask that directly, but making sure that it's a really easy decision for them throughout that sales process.
Do you have any advice specifically for service-based companies? Because I know a lot of those service companies aren't going to have the volume that a SaaS company has, right? And they're mostly, the ticket price is going to be a lot higher than maybe a simple software product. In terms of packaging and productizing, anything that you may have learned from the SaaS industry that might apply to a service company, let's say they're doing some sort of a retainer service for a marketing or something like that.
I think the same principles apply. I think that one of our products has a heavy service element to it. First, don't price based on time. That's terrible. And anyone who tries to compare you, well, my lawyer is only this much an hour or something like that, then it's that's not a good customer, and you haven't done your job in really communicating your value. But I think beyond that, there's also a lot of elements of changing up how you price for that retainer and what that looks like. Some folks like PR 2020, Paul Retzer, he's gone and done point pricing. There's other folks, and there's a lot of agencies who do that now as well. There's other folks who do it just based on, you want this, this is what it costs and stuff like that. But the same principles apply. It doesn't have to be too complicated.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, you mentioned earlier, you have a team of about 70. You've grown pretty rapidly, and you said you're not here to exit or anything like that. But what are you doing in terms of building a business that is sellable? Are there anything in terms of systems and process and technology that you're implementing so you can make sure that at some point, if you decided to exit, that the company is designed to do so? Yeah.
So I think that we don't design the company to sell, but we do things that will make it easier to sell, I guess is the way to put it. So, just basic things like all of our DocuSigns are in one place. It's amazing when you talk to COOs or the first senior ops person that comes into a company, that's normally the first thing they do is all right, let's prep the company for sale. Not that you're going to sell it, but you prep it for sale in the sense of, all right, let's get all of our contracts in one place. Let's get all this other, because at the end of the day, your saleable asset is typically your contracts, right? Which is kind of a weird thing. And when you have, mid-market and enterprise customers, we have a lot of contracts, right? I think other things are just systems, right? I think that we don't do enough systems thinking within our teams, just in general. We've worked a lot to make sure the systems are set up and finding the right people, but also making sure that those systems are in place so that they are saleable. And it's not just one of those things where, oh, cool, like this business falls apart if Patrick dies or Patrick is no longer with it. I think that's a mistake a lot of people make, and they don't make that transition early enough in terms of how they should like structure their team.
What's your perspective on like organic growth coming from actual sales that's from the product that you have versus, basically trying to fuel it through raising capital?
Yeah, so I mean, we haven't raised money at all, and part of me thinks that was a good decision. Part of me thinks that was a bad decision. Anyone who's like, screw VCs or you have to raise money, neither of those people are right. It just really depends on the business. I didn't have any obligations or anything like that, so I was able to, and thankfully I didn't have student loans either, which is a really big thing. So I was able to, start a business and kind of, be at zero for my salary for 9 months, right? Not everyone has that luxury, even if they're building a simple web app. So I think that for me, I think we will raise money at some point, but it's not something that we're necessarily looking to do like just because I think that right now we're not being held back by cash. I think there will be a point actually pretty soon at our size and at our trajectory where we're going to be held back, and raising a decent round will be the best decision for growth within the company.
And I know one of the pricing models that you follow is the freemium option, right? Starting with a free and then upgrade to some of the advanced features that you have, which, like you said earlier, it supplements with some service. And HubSpot adapted that, I think it was about 2 years ago, in which everybody was kind of making fun of their idea of, going freemium. And especially with your SDR model, then are you trying to just go after those, 20,000 plus customers who are actively using your free product to try to get them to upgrade? Or are you going into cold, trying to find people more using the freemium product and then hopefully using automation or something to move them to the paid version?
The best model or the best metaphor for freemium is typically to think about it like pools as well as rivers, right? So if you think about your acquisition, your growth, you have these rivers that are bringing you leads, right? Demand gen, events, sales teams, typically all these different things. And then you have these pools, which are either, product content, like freemium and content are like the big ones there, where if you turn everything else off, that content's still going to produce leads for a foreseeable future. So I think that we have both. So we have a pool, which is basically, these are people that are on ProfitWell that we, try to get onto our paid products. And then we also have rivers, which are, outreach, outbound, these types of things that allow us to kind of push things forward. And we kind of focus on both essentially. But yeah, that's how we think about it. And I think that the big misconception with freemium is that it's just this instant unlock. Your freemium product has to be better than the paid competition. And that's huge. And so I think that's something to kind of think about when it comes to kind of growth. And when it comes to just like understanding how freemium actually works, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big challenge too, right? Especially if you're in a very crowded space and now you got to make your free product to be better than your competition who's actually charging for it. That just sounds crazy. But obviously companies like HubSpot and you guys are making it work. So
yeah.
I guess there's something to be said about it.
Well, it's just the market, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that, again, back to a comment I made, like all these channels are getting denser and denser. And if that's happening, and we're not getting these new channels opening up, you have to reinvent the channels that you're in, right? So this is where ABM comes into play, right? Like ABM is just account-based marketing. For those of you who don't know, it's good sales of 10 years ago, right? Like it's enterprise sales of 10 years ago. And now we're just applying it to more of the market. And I think that that's the big thing I don't think a lot of people realize, is that with freemium, you are using your best piece of content out there, which is your product, right? And CAC is typically about 25% lower for those customers who convert from freemium than from a kind of a sales process or a cold start. So it's all about, ultimately it's all about, what works and where do you get the most leverage and momentum. But yeah, I think we probably took a little bit of more of a risk than I think we thought at the time. If we look at back, like the data we actually had versus the data we have now. And so, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, but obviously there's a lot of models because you guys are a model, HubSpot is a model. There's a lot of companies doing this approach, or they're actually introducing some sort of a tricky product like Wistia. I think they came up with Soapbox as a product, which, everybody's installing the Soapbox Chrome extension. And then gradually then the Soapbox is like, oh, okay, I'm maxed out. I have to kind of upgrade to Wistia to really use the full product features, right? So a lot of simpler products as well can still lead you to mass customer acquisition efforts. So in terms of productivity, I know we as entrepreneurs, there's so many things to do, right? You got leadership calls and you have product meetings and you have probably investor conversations. There's so much stuff, right? And the sales meetings, all those things. What are some of the productivity hacks that really working well for you that you can provide us, some ideas for others?
Yeah, I think I don't know if these are hacks exactly, but finding not just how your body best works, but also finding what makes you the happiest. So for me, I don't think my body best works on my schedule. I'm a 4 a.m. guy, so I wake up every day at 4 a.m. Sometimes I'm out of the office earlier, but that still might be like 3 p.m. And sometimes I'm here till 6 still, with a break kind of in between to go work out or maybe to go for a long walk or something like that. But I found that I'm my happiest when that's the kind of schedule that I have, when I don't feel like I'm rushed at night, or that I don't have any room between when I go home and when I go to bed. And so that's a big thing, is I just found that out, and I did that through experimentation. I think some other productivity pieces, this is maybe a little uncommon, but I'm sure you've heard something like this before. I actually stopped doing one-on-ones directly. I do office hours. So what that means is I have 90 minutes a day that people can book. And they're all at the end of the day. So I can like do my core work during the day, and then anyone's allowed to book that time. Priority goes to the people who report to me directly. And then there's a couple of people that I just talk to them so much that office hours don't make sense, nor does a one-on-one. So I think it's one of those things where that's helped a lot. And it's a little counterintuitive, but you have to track. I had to make sure that people were booking them enough, and that everyone's kind of obligated to at least every 2 weeks book at least 15 to 30 minutes, and make at least one of those conversations a month about their career and about stuff that's on their mind. So those are two things I think really, really helped me. And yeah, I think it's just COVID has really accelerated those, which I'm really happy about.
Do you do that with all 70 of your your employees, or just with the core people that are reporting to you?
Yeah, so it is with technically the whole team can book it. I don't advertise it heavily to the whole team, if that makes sense. So what I do is I basically, whenever someone's like, "Hey, can I get some time with you?" I'm like, "Sure, go in my office hours. Here's the link for you to book time." My core reporting team, plus maybe the halo around that, they're the ones who mainly use it.
Mm-hmm. What advice do you have for an entrepreneur that's just trying to get started?
Don't. No. So I think, well, in all seriousness, I think what you need to do is figure out a little bit of that why. Because I think a lot of people get started in entrepreneurship because of the money. And while you certainly can get, a good amount of money being an entrepreneur, it shouldn't be the primary reason, because there are a lot easier ways to make money, where you're working maybe similar hours, if not less hours, and making more, or working similar hours and making more, but not having to deal with kind of the overhead issues, I guess, the headaches. Yeah. So I think that like really understanding it, and if it's about money, I would either try, build an agency, doing some of these things, rather than trying to be like an entrepreneur building like a company. It's not that an agency isn't a company. It's just that you get a little more flexibility if, you're just really good, or you outsource things and stuff like that. But yeah, just know what you want. And if it's money, get a job, or, start certain types of businesses versus starting other types of businesses.
Mm-hmm. And I just recently had someone who was an entrepreneur said that basically if that person was to ever redo it, he would never do a service company. He said product companies are better, because he's a consultant to a lot of SaaS companies. So he sees how SaaS companies can scale a lot faster.
The grass is always greener.
The
grass is always greener. Yeah,
that is so true. Knowing what you know today, what advice would you give your younger self?
Don't be an idiot. I think for me, this might be it's not too personal from like a story, but it might be personal that no one else can use it. For me, I think I wish I would have explored more in terms of, my knowledge base was pretty good. I think I explored a lot, but just in terms of options out there, like when I see some of the folks who, maybe they weren't doing like the internships in high school and stuff like that, like some of the stories you hear, but at least they explored a lot more in college, like different things. They took an engineering class, they took an art class, they took things like that. I was very like, well, I'm going to go to law school, so I just have to do really well at undergrad. And, I'm not going to go too far out of my economics degree or these types of things. And I think it would have benefited to have a little bit more of a liberal arts education, even though I did go to a liberal arts college. And then also I think earlier realizing you can always find a job. Now, it might not be a job you want. It might not be a job that pays well enough, but for better or for worse, if you're college educated, you can find a job. You can be a barista. You can do these types of things. I think that I was very scared that I wasn't going to be able to find a job, and I think that was one of the things that finally, when I got there, when I'm in my mid-20s, that's when I was like, okay, cool, I can start a company, which I don't think was something that I thought of early enough.
Awesome. Well, Patrick, I really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for sharing some of the wealth of wisdom and knowledge that you have, and wish you all the best in your days ahead.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it, man.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by One IMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.